Today, I want to talk about Ursula von der Leyen, Ursula Gertrude von der Leyen, the EU Commission, or the President of the EU Commission, or the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. We're all witnesses to the tragic turn of events in Gaza, in this ongoing conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinian people. You see, over 10,000 people have been mowed down by the Israelis in response to what Hamas did, to Israel. Militants of Hamas went into Israel and, polished off over 1,400 people. I don't know the exact figure, but we watch on TV the chaos that was fomented by Hamas. Now, so many people were taken hostage. They talk of 250 people that were taken by Hamas into Gaza, and up till now, those captives have not been released, or the hostages are still to be released, by Hamas. Now, in the ensuing violence, we have seen how the Israeli forces, under the orders of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is they've gone into this notion, this spirit of retribution. Retribution. They've carried out all kinds of massacres on the Palestinian people. Punitive extermination of babies. You cannot even imagine. You cannot imagine the amount of bombings that the Palestinians have been made to suffer. Indiscriminate bombings of hospitals, of schools, but particularly hospitals, because what is interesting about this issue is that von der Leyen, even though she's a politician of the EU, she's a German politician. As I've said, the EU Commission president, but before she became that, she is a medical doctor. Von der Leyen is a medical doctor, a trained medical doctor, and a researcher. If I am not mistaken, at least that's what I can find about her. Because sometimes it is always good to dig into people to know what they stand for. You see, to look at their backgrounds in order to be able to come up with a certain kind of understanding about their conduct. You would imagine that a medical doctor would be the one to understand that hospitals are supposed to be protected, during instances of war. You see all the chaos in those hospitals in Gaza. At first, a few weeks ago, I think about 4 weeks ago, and the first hospital was when there was this big explosion in the hospital. The Israelis said no. They denied that it was not an Israeli bomb that was dropped there. They said they accused a militant group that is connected with Hamas. They accused that group of being involved with the bombing. So eventually, I think it was proven that this bombing was done by the Israelis. That still to be verified. It's hard to tell. But if you look at what is happening today, you would see that there are good reasons to, there are good reasons to actually say that the Israelis did that bombing, because they are justifying the fact that these hospitals have to be bombed. The hospitals in Gaza have to be bombed because of the fact that Hamas is using them, and holding the people, you see, as shield. They're hiding behind civilians in the hospitals there. So they're using the hospitals as a military facility, And so the Israelis are saying that, okay, if the Hamas is using this facility as using the hospital as a military facility, that makes it open for, military activity. So they have to bomb it, irrespective of the fact that there are civilians there. Civilians who are as young as newborn babies. These babies are massacred in these hospitals. We've seen very disturbing images, things that are not even worth speaking about. But we have to talk about these things. Van der Leyen is a medical doctor. You see, Claire Daly, the Irish EU parliamentary member, she came up a few days ago and she was actually lambasting Ursula von der Leyen, saying, talking about her, you know, her, her lateness, her belated concern about the sufferings of the people, well, the genocidal actions of Israel on the Palestinian people. You see, this untold suffering that has been imposed on the people of Palestine, including little children who have been massacred, with impunity. Over 10,000 Palestinians have died ever since the 7th of October when Hamas invaded Israel and killed so many people and killed over 1,000 people. Now we are told that over 5,000 children, including babies, little babies, 5,000 children, including babies, have been mowed down, have been exterminated. You see, that's punitive extermination of little babies. Van der Leyen, a medical doctor, in her capacity as a medical doctor, ought to feel concerned because her conscience ought to be jolted by the carnage of little babies, at least. You see, that's all what you would expect of a medical doctor. You see, many medical doctors, many nurses, even UN, workers have been killed by the bombs of the Israelis, indiscriminate bombings of the Israelis. Now, Netanyahu is claiming that the Hamas is using this facility to hide weapons under the hospitals. He even claimed in one video that, one speech he made that, you see, the Hamas is building tunnels under the bedrooms of children. You see, it sounds quite ridiculous. Now, if it is that you have established that this is the truth, that this is the case, that there are actually tunnels, weaponized tunnels under the bedrooms and the beds of children, how would you address that? Would you go and kill the children? Is that the easiest thing for you to do? Or is that the rational thing for you to do? Is that the most humane thing for you to do? Is it the most moral thing for you to do, to kill the children because you cannot get to the person or you cannot get to the people who are actually weaponizing the children's bedroom? Now, Claire Daly has not been able to get Ursula von der Leyen to actually, condemn the actions of Israel against the Palestinian people, including the children. The genocidal action of Israel on the children of Palestine. Little babies who have nothing to do with this carnage, with this madness. You see? So you would imagine that a medical doctor would be the one to say, no, speak out your voice, raise your voice, and say, no, these are my colleagues, the medical doctors who are taking care of all the casualties, the people who have been injured by these bombs, by the war in Israel. A medical doctor of Ursula von der Leyen's status would be the one to say, no, Israel must reconsider the way they pursue this war, the conduct of the war. You see, the use ad bellum, the reason for the war. Okay, let's say that the reason for the war is justified because they're doing it, Israel is acting in self-defense. Now, what about the conduct of the war? Use in bello. It's a Latin word. The conduct of the war. There is a problem there. This is what Ursula von der Leyen has to come out as the EU Commission president to denounce. But it has taken her all this time, ever since this war began. She has never pronounced a single word of condemnation, a single word or a single admonitory remark against the Israelis. What the hell is going on? You see, these are the kind of people. You see, these are the kind of people that run the world. These are the kind of people that run Europe. They run the politics of Europe. Politics that is totally removed from the local people. That's why people speak of a democratic deficit at the EU. The European Union has no democracy. Or you could say that democracy in the EU is quite questionable. There's a people that pride themselves, as being liberal democracies, the most advanced democracies. But these are people who are not in touch with the local communities. They're not in touch with the sufferings of the downtrodden masses. You dig? So these are the things that are going on in the EU. Now, when I speak of democratic deficit, now let me just explain something to you about the EU. You see, the EU itself is quite a funny union. It's quite funny because there's so many things that are happening there, which many people complain about, and the average European citizen is quite uh, detached, feels quite powerless. As regards the EU, they have no voice. You see, the EU operates in well, it comes when it comes to the issue of decision making, the EU operates on two basic principles. You have what they call subsidiarity, and then you have what you call co-decision. Now, the issue of subsidiarity is about the fact that decisions have to be taken at the lowest possible level so that its impact has to be felt by the local people. You see, they have to do this to make sure that this is the case, that the local people must be the ones that benefit the most from those decisions that are taken at their level, at the local level. Now, this issue of co-decision, that's not a principle that happens in the Europe in the EU Parliament. You see, the EU has two parliaments. The first one, you have what you call the Council of Ministers, which is the chamber that represents the states, and then you have the European Parliament, which is the chamber that represents the people. Now, these two chambers have what you call they operate upon the principle of co-decision. Remember, I spoke of subsidiary, which is the overall guiding principle of the EU. You see how the EU works on the principle of subsidiarity when you think about the local people. But when it comes to decision making between the two chambers in the EU Parliament, the Council of Ministers, which is the EU, the chamber that represents the states, and the European Parliament, which is the chamber that represents the people, are not in alignment with each other. You see, now the Council of Ministers, which is a chamber that represents the states, is always, not always, often overrides decisions that are taken by the European parliaments, who are who are people who are elected. These are elected people. They're elected people, elected Europeans in the European Parliament. But the Council of Ministers, these are unelected bureaucrats who incidentally take decisions that override decisions that are taken by people who are elected by the European masses. So you see what is going on over there. Now, Ursula von der Leyen is the president of the EU Commission. So she's the one that actually takes decisions that would override every single decision that are taken, even by the European Parliament. You see? Now you could see the kind of madness that is going on in the EU. You know? So you could even say that the EU is operating upon, a fascistic pathology, more or less, because that's how it is. The people vote people to go and represent them at the EU Parliament. When these people get to the EU Parliament, their voices do not count for the most part, because the people that are inside the European Commission, or the no, not the European Commission, the people that are inside the Council of Ministers, which are ministers of the various member states, these people tend to override decisions that are taken by the people who are representing those who elected them. So that is why they speak of this issue of democratic deficit at the EU. Well, that aside, you see, Ursula von der Leyen, as the European Commission president, has a lot of power, a lot of bureaucratic power. She is the one that takes the decision. She is the face of the EU. You know, she is the one that speaks for the EU. She's like the spokesperson for the EU, the lordly German spokeswoman, the conceited German spokeswoman, the supercilious German spokeswoman of the EU. You know, it seems as though some of these German politicians have some unfinished business, in Europe, especially when you think about the ties with Russia. It's like they have some unfinished business with that. Even if you look at not only Ursula von der Leyen, instead of being so conciliatory, she's being so conceited, you see, so lordly and all that. The same for this other German woman, the foreign minister called Annalena Baerbock. a young 42 years old woman. They're all in this game. They're all in this gang of impervious ideologues of Europe. They see what is going on in the Gaza. They see the amount of suffering, the amount of carnage in the Gaza. But these people do not find it in their souls, you see, to speak up and speak out for the suffering masses. The little children who have no say. I've written in one of my books that if children were given, or if they had the autonomy to choose before they were born, if they were given an idea of what this world looks like, and then they were given the autonomy to choose if they wanted to be part of this transcendental world, whether or not they wanted to be part of this world, then humanity will be almost non-existent. Now, you want to tell me that these children that have been massacred in Gaza, if you ask these children to come back to a world like this, a world in which they were killed with impunity, do you think that those children want to come to this world? Probably not. Probably not. You see? So these are the kind of things that we are dealing with. Clay Daly goes up and speaks out against Ursula von der Leyen. Not a single word of condemnation. Von der Leyen was very vocal. She was very vocal, in a condemnation of Russia when Russia intervened, what she said, Russian aggression in Ukraine. The Russians say that they intervened, to protect the Russian-speaking people of eastern Ukraine. Von der Leyen of the EU said that Russia had invaded Ukraine. That was Russian aggression on Ukraine, And on the basis of that, she came up with, or the EU came up with so many sanctions, you see, against the Russians. They're hoping that these sanctions would target Russian access to the most notable capital markets, But now we could see that those sanctions have not really worked, because sanctions are always a double-edged sword, especially when you're dealing with a great power. You see, a great power like Russia, which can have reprisal action of its own. Von der Leyen, in a very conceited tone, always supercilious, always lordly, always arrogant, always condescending. She was saying that the sanctions would deprive Russia of a prosperous future. Now she's the the Lord. She's the Lord that determines, what is going to happen to other people. She's that sense of importance that she gives to herself. She said that the sanctions would deprive Russia. That was the hope anyway, that those sanctions were going to deprive Russia of a prosperous future. Now, the question I want to ask Ursula Gertrude von der Leyen, and I've written this in my book, Garrison Metropolis. I asked this question. I said, but what if Russia does not want a prosperous future? What if what Russia actually wants is a dependable future? Von der Leyen, as a researcher, has to understand that, to be able to know what people want, you have to be able to immerse yourself in the context of those people, to be able to generate specific knowledge about those people, about what those people want, about their desires, about their vision of the world. You have to be able to immerse yourself within that context to generate knowledge from that context. You don't speak for people. She's telling the Russians what she thinks the Russians want. She's telling the Russians what she thinks the Russians deserve to have. But the Russians probably want something else. They wanted to go to Ukraine and demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. That was the objective. And as far as we know, the Russians are still claiming that that is their objective. Their objective is not to go and conquer Ukraine and take over Ukraine. Their objective is to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. And they've been doing that. So many people have died. They're talking of over 500,000 Ukrainians have died. Even when they had this Minsk agreement that could have, saved so many lives. We didn't have to go to all this. But the ego, the vastly inflated ego of European politicians like Ursula von der Leyen, like Annalena Baerbock, like many of these people of the EU. This is just a taste of what goes on in the EU. How you would work in a place like that. You see, you have no chance because your voice doesn't count. That's exactly what is going on in the EU. You know, now a woman that was very vocal in her denunciation of the Russian aggression of Ukraine is totally silent when babies are being, you know, exterminated with impunity in Gaza. Why is it supposed to be acceptable? That in itself is the most grave moral solecism that you can think of. It's a moral fault. You know, you cannot be speaking so ardently about something, condemning aggression, telling the world that you are respecting these values, the value of human life, humanitarian values. You see, non-combatant immunity, that's a principle. What has become of that principle? Ursula von der Leyen should have to tell us that. She's nowhere to be found. All these EU members, all these presidents and prime ministers of the EU that were so vocal in condemning Russia are totally silent. You see, the genocidal aggression or genocidal retaliation of Israel over the Palestinians. Are they fighting against Hamas or are they fighting against the people of Palestine? That is something that has to be made clear. If von der Leyen and the other, you see, and the other gang members of the EU were so quick, in celebrating the arrest warrant that was issued by the ICC against President Vladimir Putin of Russia, what will these people say? What will these European politicians headed by Ursula von der Leyen, what would they say about Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel for what Israel is doing, what the Israeli soldiers are doing in Palestine against the Palestinian people? Vladimir Putin was accused of removing children from a war zone, removing, say, removing Ukrainian soldiers from the war zone, and he took these children to Russia to safety before the war began, or so that these children would not be killed. But he was accused of, deporting children, unlawful deportation, as they called it, of children, and on the basis of that, the International Criminal Court issued a warrant of arrest against Vladimir Putin. Now, we are facing another situation. Israel has been, massacring, exterminating people, civilians, you see, in Gaza, and to some extent in the West Bank. There's some conflict going on over there as well. Totally unopposed. No one is denouncing it. Well, a few leaders are coming out now. The Belgians are coming out to denounce this, denounce the Israeli action in the Gaza or against the Palestinian civilians. You see, Trudeau of Canada came out the other day and denounced it. Macron the other day came out with some ammunition against the Israelis. And then we have the Australians, a few of them. I said it, that the conflict in Israel is not going to be solved. The conflict in between Palestine and Israel is not going to be resolved through this violence. It's just a waste of time. I asked the question before. I said, in whose interest, you see, is it to prove that the Iron Dome of Israel is not the pick of the bunch? Was it just a ploy to justify this punitive extermination of the Palestinian people? Was it just a ploy to occupy Palestine even further or to drive out the Palestinians from their land? So these are the things. So things are becoming clearer and clearer now, But then Ursula von der Leyen is nowhere to be found. This is really preoccupying because when you listen to Claire Daly speak about Ursula von der Leyen, you would wake up and say, but look, yeah, somebody's taking notice of what this woman is doing, It is like these people have an unfinished business against the Russians. Ursula von der Leyen and Elena Baerbock and this German defense minister. It's like they have an unfinished business against the Russians. You see, so one would question, and in a very logical way, you know, what really pushed the USSR, because at the time it was not Russia, what really pushed the Soviet Union to remove its soldiers from Germany after the Second World War, when the US is still occupying Germany till date. The German soldiers are still, sorry, American soldiers are still in Germany till date, when the soldiers of the Soviet Union left Germany a long time ago. What is this passionate hatred against the Russians? And what is this uh, unqualified love for Israel, to the extent that Israel can be allowed, to massacre little babies in their numbers and no words of condemnation? And then the ICC is not even delivering one single word to investigate this humanitarian crime. You see, this humanitarian inanity. So these are the things people have to deal with. You see, it's quite fascinating to notice these things. You know, on the one hand, you say that the Russians are criminals because they invaded Ukraine. Well, the Russians are saying that they came into Ukraine, you see, to protect the Russian speaking people that were being massacred by the Ukrainian government, headed by Zelensky. Now the Palestinians are claiming that the Israelis are pushing them away from their land. You know, so we have an issue of settlement. The Israelis who were settled there in Palestine in 1948 are taking up more and more space, more and more land, and pushing the Palestinian people to the fringes of that society. Now they've created, a few localities there. One up there in the West Bank, and then you have Gaza down south. You see, you have the Sinai up there. You know, so it's a very complicated issue, but still, it's a very simple issue to address. If only these European politicians, the Western politicians, could let go of their ego. You see, because their consciences are being jolted by the carnage that we all observe in the Gaza. You see, Gaza has been reduced to rubble. Who is going to pay for that? It would be interesting to know what Ursula von der Leyen thinks about that carnage, what she thinks about that devastation in Gaza. Who is going to take care of that? You see, you get the impression that the Europeans don't really seem to understand the gravity of what they're doing. You know, they don't seem to understand the gravity of what they're doing. You see, this pursuit of relative gains, this pursuit of self-interest has blinded the Europeans to the extent that, they would kill even themselves without even noticing that they're doing that. You see? A European would throw a bomb. European politicians have to specify before, people start to throw accusations left and right. The European politicians seem to have lost their minds. They're out of their damn minds. You see? They're all quiet. The babies are being mowed down. You see, people are demonstrating the world over. See, you have to be a father. When you're a father or mother of a child, and then you take your child in the morning, you drop the child off at school, and sometime before you leave, you see the baby's crying. He doesn't want you to leave, but you have to go. So you leave the child and you go to work. Wherever you're going, you just leave the child. You're going away with a heavy heart, but the child has to go to school. So you leave the child there. It could be at the daycare center. You leave the child there. The whole day you're thinking about your child. And then news comes that the school where you left your child has been bombed. And every little child that was in that school was massacred. How does it feel? Do these European politicians not think about things like this? Have they lost their sense of humanity? Oh yeah, they have done so. You see? The level of callousness inside the minds of those people is unspeakable. You know, you want to kill the Palestinian people, you start by demonizing them. You start by telling the people that these are human animals. You see, you demonize these people because when you demonize them, it becomes easy for you to start killing them with impunity. When you kill these people, you drop all these vicious bombs, these thermobaric bombs on these people, these aerosol bombs on people, burning babies in these buildings, and then you go home and cuddle dogs, cuddle cats. You see, you go home and go down on your knees and you're kissing a dog when you massacre little babies. Where is your honor, Ursula von der Leyen? Where is your honor? Where is your humanity? We have to be able to tell the Israelis to slow down and talk to the Palestinians because this issue will never be resolved through violence. It will never be resolved through violence. It's going to be resolved through dialogue and consultation because that is only when you're going to get some kind of compromise. You dig? It's not going to solve anything. Violence will not solve the problem. It's only compromise, forgiveness. Because if you continue to promote this kind of hatred that you're preaching against the people of Palestine, who ought to be disambiguated from Hamas, except you want to tell us that you're fighting against the people of Palestine, or except you want to tell us that the people of Palestine are not to be distinguished from the Hamas people, then you're telling us that it's all right for you, or you're justifying the punitive extermination of the whole of the Palestinian population. You want to remove them from their land. So that's what you want to do. But tell us that that's exactly what you want to do. So don't pretend that you're doing something and accusing somebody else of doing what you're actually doing, gaslighting somebody of what you're doing, telling somebody, accusing somebody of doing what you're actually doing to them or doing to him or her. You know? You see? That's a narcissistic personality trait which has to be fought and destroyed. Now, because many of these people, these European politicians, do not seem to realize it. They don't seem to realize where this thing is going. You see? They don't seem to realize the potential explosiveness of this conflict. It's going to escalate into a full-blown regional conflagration, if not even worse, if nothing is done. So these are things that have to be looked into in a very meticulous way, in a very selfless way, and a very dispassionate way. People have to forget this thing called self-interest for a while. In Africa, even though it's changing now, because this callousness is spreading everywhere, but in Africa, of our ancestors, what happened when somebody died, the whole society the community came to a standstill. Somebody has died. The community cannot move forward until something is done about the person who has died. But now, these massacres are everywhere. You see, life is practically without value anymore. Some people just wake up in the morning and go somewhere and just kill people. And it always begins with one person. It's very difficult to start, but once you take the life of someone, you continue doing that. That's how you become a serial killer, a merciless murderer. An exterminator of humans. But then you go home, and the love that you have inside of your soul is reserved for your pets, your dogs, and your cats. What the hell are you? This is the kind of world we live in. As Joe sang, they say the world is spinning around. They say the world is spinning around, but I say the world is upside down. Joe Higgs, the Jamaican ancestor. Joe Higgs was singing of what I call the adulterated universe, a universe of callous traits, a universe of impunity, you see, a universe of shame, of scorn, of disdain, you see, a universe of entrapment, you see, a universe of punitive extermination, you see, a universe of soullessness. We have to stop this madness. So, to Ursula von der Leyen, I have to say to you, we all see what you're doing. The whole world sees what you're doing. We all see how you're neglecting little children. You, as a medical doctor, a researcher who ought to understand the notion of immersion. I know you're not into social sciences or social research methodology, but you have to understand this. I have to remind you about these things. Immerse yourself in the context of the Palestinian people. You'll be able to generate knowledge about the sufferings of those people. And if you're not jolted, if your conscience is not jolted by the sufferings of these people who have been, forced, into a corner through punitive extermination of their people, then we can say that your humanity has to be questioned. Your own humanity has to be put in question if your conscience is not jolted by what you observe happening in the Gaza. Yeah, we have to remind these people about this thing. So I'm very grateful to people like Clay Daly, the Irish politician at the EU. These are people who speak out. So many people are speaking out. Some will say, but who listens to you? But it doesn't matter who listens to you. Just to make your voice heard. Every human being has to be able to make their voice heard when you see suffering. You have to feel compassion whenever you see suffering anywhere. So empathy for the Israelis has to go in tandem with compassion for the Palestinian people. Ursula von der Leyen, this is something you have to understand very well. You cannot have selective empathy or selective sympathy when people are dying, when little babies are dying. What you're actually doing without knowing is transposing hatred from Hamas onto the Israelis, shifting the German guilt onto the Palestinian. No, not onto the Palestinian. You're shifting the German guilt onto the Israelis without knowing. Or maybe you do. Who knows? We have to be very careful with things we do, because the world is a tinderbox. You could see for yourself. The world is a tinderbox waiting to ignite at any time. What will it take for the world to implode? It's humans. You see, it's humans that are going to destroy this world. We have to take a back step and understand that life is precious for everyone. The suffering masses in Palestine are facing the same kinds of problems as the suffering masses in Israel. I'm not talking of the political elites who are the ones that are imposing the suffering on the masses, because Israel itself is a badly fractured country. Israel is, contrary to what they make the world believe, Israel is not a country with a close-knit fraternity. There are people in Israel who do not support the policies of the Israeli Zionist regime, which is led by Benjamin Netanyahu. There are people in Israel, you see, the Jewish people, you see, the people that follow the Judaism faith do not follow this. They've come out. You see many of them coming out to denounce this violence. So don't make us believe that everybody in Israel is supporting what is going on in Palestine. No, it's not true. And don't tell us that everybody in Palestine is supportive of what Hamas went and did in Israel. That's not true. But to get to that understanding, you have to be able to talk to each other. You have to be able to come down from the high horse and feel human and be human with the people that you despise, with the people that you scorn. You have to be able to talk because violence is not going to lead you anywhere. Genocide is not something that humans should pray for. Humans should fight against genocide. Humans should punish all the perpetrators of genocide. That is how it's supposed to be. Not to sit quiet when genocide is being committed on little children, on innocent civilians, on blameless little babies, for God's sake. Ursula von der Leyen, you have to speak up. Otherwise, you are going to be a candidate for the International Criminal Court. Yeah. If you don't speak out, you ought to be a candidate for the International Criminal Court. All right.